Okay. There's a couple of basic study goals at the beginning of this unit that keep us focused on global food systems, big picture stuff. So I want to start with that global perspective about what the global food supply is, and then we'll start to get into nitty gritty about ranching, about dirt, about fertilizers or pesticides or whatever. Study goal number one has some really valuable basics about who grows what and stuff, what grows throughout the planet. But I'd like to make two additions. One is a very important global trend. So we have a horrifying amount of poverty globally, but we do have global economic development, meaning more people have more access to economic activity, to currency, to income. What's interesting is what people do when they earn a little more money. Imagine you've gone from $2.50 a day to $3 or $4 a day. That's not really enough to get into jewelry or plastic surgery or fancy cars or collecting watches or whatever. What we consider opportunities if we have more wealth is a totally different level. But I'd like you to imagine what happens when people go from like really, really, really poor to double that income, which still means really, really poor. You're not going to buy a TV. You're not going to start making payments on a Mercedes. You're not going to get some dope Ferragamo shoes. What people do is they buy more meat. Honestly, humans as a global average are mostly vegetarian, mostly due to poverty. Meat's always expensive, it's significantly more expensive, and if you've been eating vegetables all the time, the opportunity to maybe step up, like, dude, I got a couple of bucks. I'm going to go from once or twice a year to maybe once a month, or go from once a month to once a week. Our level of meat consumption is pretty crazy when you start to look at human averages globally. But this represents a giant shift in the global meat supply. Like if all the rich people on earth doubled their meat consumption, that's a lot of meat, but that's not a lot of people, right? Like you're taking our servings of meat 3 or 4 a week, and if you double that, sure, that's a lot of meat, but how many people are rich enough to eat meat 4 times a week already? That's like a global sliver of humanity. If you take half of humanity and double their meat from 5 times a year to 10 times a year, that actually represents a huge shift in the global food supply because there's a lot of people that are that poor. We're going to come back to this later, but I need you to remember that global development means a rise in total meat consumption, and it's a notable, like a globally significant number of additional servings of meat per year. Another key detail that I'd like you to write down is written in bold. Let me see if I've got the right technology here. If you were to make a pie chart of everything grown on Earth, like stuff that people grow, of all agriculture on Earth, you could cut it in the middle and then make a little wedge like this. where about 10% of our global food supply is trash, wasted. 40% goes to animals. That's kind of a lot. That other 40% is direct to humans. So we feed our animals as much as we feed humans in total. This is why it matters that more people are eating meat, right? Because that's going to require more livestock to get the meat, and that means you're going to have to feed the humans. So how can we expand our supply of livestock? I mean, sure, we're wasting 10%, but it's tough to get more efficient. I mean, 10% is not that bad. And surprisingly, we are using about 10% for biofuels. Let's imagine that we could just cancel that out. That's not a lot of room for growth in meat consumption. We have rising number of humans, and we've essentially maxed out the planet. The circle can only grow a little bit more. So we're going to start seeing a very interesting conflict where those of us who like meat kind of fighting another human for the animal that I want to feed to a cow because I'd rather eat a cow. Interesting challenges to the global food supply in number 1. Then for number 3, let's talk about that food supply, because you may have heard this already. There is no food shortage. We could debate numbers. I'm not qualified, actually, to be conclusive about this. But if you take that total amount that we grow, that's enough to feed maybe twice humanity today. We could feed the planet with half our agricultural output. Of course, we are putting a whole bunch of that into our cars and into our livestock. But it's interesting to remember that we grow plenty of food, no shortage of food. If I'm not mistaken, actually, I should probably correct myself. This is the amount that could feed humanity twice. We grow tons and tons and tons of food. There is no net shortage of food. Instead, what we've got to explain our hunger is not food shortage, but instead, I'd like you to always remember this. Please be a righteous human being and know this difference. Famine is a breakdown in food distribution. In other words, we got plenty of food, we just can't seem to get it over there to where the hungry people are. And it's super depressing, right? But I don't know, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. Like, what are you supposed to do? Send your leftover Taco Bell to some distant land where people are hungry? How, like, what am I going to do about, like, the Libyan food crisis? They could have my sandwich, but how am I going to do that? What's interesting is it's like a simple, I can say it simply, but it's not a simple solution. I want you to get ready for notes, and I want you to realize something. When I say food distribution, it's not about, like, how can I ship my sandwich to Libya? When I talk about food distribution, I want you to remember that this is about global systems. This is about economics and who's in power. And so here comes some things that I'd like you to note. There are 4 main things at play. 1, probably the leading reason why food doesn't reach people is conflict and disruption. The world's leading cause of hunger is warfare. And we always measure the mortality of warfare by counting the dead soldiers, whether they're good guys or bad guys. That's what we consider fatality from war. But that's extremely misleading, because for every dead combatant, there are tens or even hundreds of dead civilians. It's not the soldiers, it's the people. Good guys and bad guys, they could be bullies or they could be heroes, and they could be old or they could be kids. But nobody wants to drive across a minefield. You can't deliver water when all the pipes got blown up. You can't go to the supermarket if the supermarket just got bombed. You can't feed people in a war zone. Number two, we live in a global economy. You've probably heard this word a lot, globalization. And honestly, there's like a whole, you can talk economics and ask your parents to tell you how they believe this. And remember that there's an opposite belief. So whichever side you get from your parents, there's going to be a completely contradictory one. Globalization is, whether we like it or not, the idea that the planet works as one global economy. So instead of local money that stays local for local resources and local trade and local economy, we now have a global market. And you can tell your food has one of the biggest footprints of carbon anywhere in your lifestyle. The average American dinner plate travels 1,250 miles. 1,250 miles as an average before reaching an American who's eating dinner. So if you're having a local meal, somebody else's dinner traveled 2,500 miles. That's a lot of carbon, and that's why one of the largest contributors to climate change is the shipping of food. Now, this matters to starvation, not the shipping part, not the climate change part per se, but the global economy part. A farmer in Honduras does not grow carrots for her neighbors anymore. Nowadays, that Honduran farmer is growing coffee for me. The farmer could grow carrots for her neighbors, but her neighbors in Honduras, they don't make a lot of money, and I'm willing to pay a lot for my coffee, right? Like, if her neighbor in Honduras is living on $2.50 a day, and they're going to spend almost all of that on food, that's only $2 a day. Imagine all the carrots you have to grow to feed a human and get $2 for that. I'll pay $2 for a cup of coffee right now. I don't give a crap. So we've delocalized food. That farmer is like, well, I could feed you and you pay me all you got, or I can just grow this other stuff and put it in a barrel and send it to fat white guy over there, and he's going to pay me like 100 times more. Sorry, neighbors. And this is what we mean by the food not being where the people are. There's people, but the farmer doesn't work for those people. The farmer works for me. I am taking food from the world's poor because I'm willing to pay for it. I've got ingredients that are almost as expensive as gold. Some governments do protect their poor. You can set up policy about how much your farmers can export, or you can tax them for exporting so that it's pays off to grow food for the neighbors. But a lot of countries don't do that, and we love that because it keeps our fancy diets fancy. Number three, everybody's so worried about climate change that they'll do anything to avoid fossil fuels. And we figured out that you can grow fuel, like you can make ethanol from corn, and that's an additive to cut out gasoline, or you can make biodiesel from oily plants like soybeans and stuff. And we'll come back to this later, but there's a unfortunate situation here. First of all, we've taken agricultural land and shifted that to solving the climate problem by feeding cars instead of people. That's a bummer. More hunger. Problem number two, we're going to come back to this later, but write it down now. It turns out that biofuels usually take so much carbon to grow, like you got to grow those crops, and that means you're going to spend fossil fuels, that there's not even a carbon savings. Right? Like you spend so many fossil fuels to grow the corn, now you've made ethanol, but you already burned more carbon than you'll save when you use ethanol. We'll talk more about this at a later time. Anyway, there's this global trend that we're growing more fuel for cars. And then finally, if you look at these issues, like, yeah, you could solve this by like shipping a bag of rice, but then what? That's not going to change warfare. People seem to love warfare, and globalization isn't going anywhere. We love our global economy. I've got stuff from places I don't even know where they come from. My coffee's not actually from Honduras, it's from Sumatra, and I still don't know where that is. We can't seem to stop warfare. We can't seem to stop globalization. Biofuels probably should stop, but everybody's a sucker and they don't listen to the details, so biofuels aren't going anywhere. So yeah, we can ship food, but we can't ship every meal forever, right? Like those problems are too expensive to fix, and like shipping the food to Libya every day starts to become just crazy expensive. So don't we don't help the world's poor. We've built a system that cuts out about a tenth of humanity. Uh, Depending on how you define this, between 1 in 5 to 1 in 10 people are food insecure or food deficient or nutrient deficient or starving to death. Depends how you define this. But a lot of people, 10-15% of humanity don't have enough food. And like, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but we're all a part of that system. It totally sucks. I'm sure that your mom and dad didn't create this system, and none of us would like to sign up for it. And we're all willing to ship a sandwich to Libya, but yeah, horrifying reality. This is what we mean when we talk about breakdowns in global food distribution. I need you to know specific examples like this. I'm going to stop this video and make a couple other short ones. Thanks.